Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Hello everyone, this is Colin once again, and I'm making this video because I just watched Essence of Thought, his video entitled Muslim Fundamentalist Gets Angry at Ex-Muslims, Highlighting Abuse, regarding Musa Adnan. Now, very much like the video, I'm hoping that this video won't be a long video. Of course, I say that, and then I have it of rambling, as many of you know who watch my videos consistently. In a nutshell, very much liked Essence of Thought's video. Would highly recommend the video for those who want to just see a very well, or I should say, an example of a well-critiqued video. Essence of Thought just, I don't want to use the word decimates, but does a good job of seeing the issues with Musa's original video. And I'm making the video also because I've had requests over the past few months to make a video about my leaving Islam, my apostasy. And I was planning on doing a video addressing this subject, and then the whole converted to Islam thing happened. And I felt like my timing would have probably been viewed as trying to ride his apostasy wave. And so I just didn't want to do a video and have people accusing me of trying to sort of steal his thunder, or, you know, oh, converted to Islam did a video, so now everybody's coming out of the woodwork. Of course, I don't think there's anything wrong with someone doing that, but I sort of found myself fascinated by his journey, and wanted to step back and sort of let things simmer a little bit. So now I'm doing this video because I've had people requesting that I do it. I've written about my leaving Islam on my blog, which, if you haven't subscribed to my blog, it's a WordPress blog. You can find it, the link to it on the main page, but I'll link it down below in the description section of this video. So I've actually been pretty open about this for probably a couple of years now, give or take, where I actually went through systematically to talk about why I left Islam. But it was very obvious to me that the traffic wasn't really getting to the blog because, you know, there were people for, several months into the year in which I posted those blog posts that were still asking me if I was Muslim, and so it seemed like the traffic wasn't getting over to the blog. So, yeah, I don't really want to repeat everything that I said in the blog. I want to use Essence of Thought's video as sort of a launching pad to sort of ruminate on my reaction to not so much what he said in the video, because like I said, he did a great job of dissecting Musa's video. But some of the things, I want to look at it from a different perspective, because Essence of Thought is, you know, he is an atheist, he's a humanist, and I think that's great. And so I see why he's critiquing Musa, and he's doing it for very justifiable reasons. My critique of Musa's video is going to be a little different because, being an ex-Muslim, the video is actually addressing someone like myself, and so I feel like you know, my take on it might be a little different than Essence of Thought. And so the main thing that Musa presented, which was very much refuted by Essence of Thought, was complaining that people were using emotional reasons for why they left Islam, or, you know, feelings or what have you. And also another argument was, you know, look, you know, there's no, he chalked up most of the oppression and persecution that happens to apostates as being, I forget the phrase he used, but essentially saying that people are going rogue and they're killing apostates, when really in an Islamic country with a judge or a Sharia is actually enforced, there's a justice system in place where people are tried, and then if found guilty of apostasy would be executed. And so he is doing sort of the classic distancing from kind of going, well, there's no true Sharia countries, so these people who are dealing out this sort of rogue justice they're just rogues. They're doing this, they're going rogue, and then also claiming that apostates are using just arguments from feeling to describe why they've left the religion. Essence of Thought did a great job of showing how this obviously was not the case. But I'm fascinated by this because one of the things that I study and have been studying, and now very much in my current academic coursework, studying the psychology of religion. That's been a passion of mine for several years now. Majored in psychology, have graduate training in psychotherapy, and I'm currently in graduate studies studying religion, spirituality, with a emphasis on the psychology of religion. So this is where my coursework is taking me. I'm by no means an expert, but this is what I do. And so I find it fascinating that he accuses people as if it's a problem that they use arguments from feeling. And really, I think this is, an unfair critique in a lot of ways. People's reasoning for liking or not liking something can be considered rational or irrational by anybody. Anybody can have that judgment upon anyone. And it really comes down to personality types. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I would highly suggest Musa and anyone watching this video to pick up Carl Jung's book, Psychological Types. Read the primary text and see that there are 16 personality types around the world, according to Jung's theory. All of these 16 types obtain and process information and form opinions about information and about life in 16 different ways. Out of those 16 types, there are some that are considered to be very rational and very logical. They are considered probably thinking types or sensation types. They look at facts. They typically work within systems that are considered to be systems of logic, what would be considered very rational people. Then you have folks who really judge things based on their own value system. And they may gather information from their gut, from their imagination, kind of thinking in their own internal world about what decisions to make and how they process information, as opposed to people saying, well, you need to follow these very rational, logical ways of doing things. This might be confusing to some people, and some of you watching this video are going to go, oh, I relate to that one, and some people might go, oh yeah, I do that, and then, anyway. Because of that, you have to ask yourself the question, is it fair to dismiss someone's leaving of religion because of how they feel about it? And from a psychotherapeutic perspective, I can't actually cast judgment on people for making a decision like that. I just can't, based on my training. People make decisions that make sense to them. Some might study something academically. They'll read texts, they'll take courses, attend workshops, lectures, watch IERA videos, and be totally amazed on a very rational level, philosophical level, metaphysical level, based on just the material, that it makes sense to them, and then they'll convert to Islam. In a similar fashion, they'll start reading academic works, attending lectures, workshops, classes, doing very logical, rational research in philosophy, metaphysics, theology, and come out of it being disillusioned with Islam and then leave the religion. Now, there might be some folks who go to the mosque and they learn to pray, and their reason for converting to Islam is due to their emotional reaction. They have maybe a spiritual experience, something that's very subjective. And maybe they hear the call to prayer, or they read a couple chapters of the Quran, and for whatever reason, it strikes them as being incredibly beautiful and profound, and they decide to convert. In a similar fashion, there might be those out there who have a very bad experience at the mosque, or are stunned, have an emotional, visceral reaction to something that they read from the Quran or the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. Something just doesn't sit well with them in a subjective fashion, and then slowly but surely they leave the faith. Now, one could be labeled as rational. It's objective, we're all reading the same material, maybe we're all in the same course together, and we come out of it having studied the same material. It's as about as objective as a qualitative experience might get. The other is rather subjective and might be labeled irrational. Now, what I find really fascinating is when I considered myself a Muslim, and when I decided to convert, and when I saw other people converting, there was never a question. And maybe this is a difference between British Muslims and American Muslims. I was an American Muslim. I didn't really know very many British Muslims, except for people I talked to on the internet. So maybe the way British Muslims observe people on their way to converting into Islam, maybe they do it different. But I can only speak from my experience as being an American Muslim. And when I saw someone who was interested in converting, no one pushed the pause button and went, wait, is this person has he or she thought about this rationally? Right? Has he gone to courses and has asked a lot of questions? Has he considered things rationally before he's converted? No. Never happened that way. Never saw it happen that way. The way I saw it was the second that someone was obviously having a positive experience in the mosque, and they were interested, and they were talking to people at the mosque, and maybe they just attended mosque once. I remember one case, someone only attended mosque once, and before the person left, they had taken their shahada. Bada bing, bada boom. They were out. They were a brand new minted Muslim, and no one bothered to ask a question until after he had taken his shahada. Oh, by the way, how did you come to be interested in Islam? Now, this is not really a critique. This is just an observation that I made. Now, fascinating though, when someone apostates, suddenly the rules are different. Oh, well, did the person really read that much about the religion? Oh, well, he's using arguments from feeling to justify why he left. You should be thinking about this. We should be able to have an academic discussion about this. We should be able to think about this rationally. So when they're about to enter the religion, academics and rationale are not even mentioned. When someone apostates, suddenly it's the apostate's fault for talking about feelings, and then it's a question of how much did they actually know about the faith. Might want to reevaluate how you keep people in the religion, perhaps. But having said that, my own experience with apostating was, I think it was a combination of both, if people might believe that. I certainly deconstructed the theology by reading the primary source material. I found myself having actual issues with some of the metaphysics. Some of the concepts that I was running into were problematic to my sensibilities. I don't think feeling had anything to do with it. It was sort of like when I was first reading about some of these theological concepts, I accepted them. And then later on ended up rejecting them. There were some concepts that I didn't really study very closely, and when I tried to, they were so complicated, and the reactions I was getting from people, from other Muslims, was, don't worry about it. I talk about this in my blog for an example. At least I think I wrote about this. The question of predestination and free will was sort of a stumbling block. It became a stumbling block for me. When I first converted, I didn't really pay attention to the concept very much, and I kind of chalked it up to saying, I have a sense that I have free will. If I have a destiny, and if there is predestination, and Allah has designated that some people are going to be in heaven and some people are going to go to hell, only Allah knows that. I don't know that, so why worry about it? I'll just do the best I can, and I'll engage with reality, with the perception that I have free will. And that was my attitude. But when I started to question the doctrine of predestination, I had Muslims who tried to explain it to me, and to be completely honest, and I was nice to them when they would try to explain it to me, but in my mind I thought, this just doesn't make any sense. And when I would try to ask some questions for clarification, they just ended up telling me, don't worry about this. It's sort of beyond our understanding. And in the old Catholic part of my brain kind of was triggered because it reminded me when I was having issues with like the Orthodox doctrine of the Trinity, and how that didn't make any logical sense to me at all. I was trying to be rational about it, and I would ask other Catholics and other Christians about the Trinity, and they would just tell me, it's a mystery. You don't need to worry about that. So I was trying to be as rational and logical about my analysis of some of these doctrines, and found that I was just taking exception to a number of things that I just sort of had, I don't want to say blindly accepted, but certainly without very many questions had accepted when I converted into Islam, and found myself not being able to reconcile what some of the text was saying with the rational part of my mind. Now, I would be completely lying if I left out a discussion on emotion. Obviously, I had an emotional reaction to when I started to critique the idea of God judging people and sending people to hell, and how I found that to be, it just didn't feel right to me. Now, that's a very subjective feeling. There are people out there who, no doubt, of many different religious persuasions, but probably dominated by Orthodox Muslims and Orthodox Christians, who have no problem thinking that people are going to get roasted in hellfire for all eternity because God is going to judge them in that fashion. I began to feel that was actually very unjust. And I had difficulty convincing myself that I should continue to accept an idea of a judgmental deity. And truth be told, when I converted to Islam, I grabbed a couple books here. Some of the books you can see back here, the case I'm kind of pointing to. Can't really tell which one I'm pointing to, but this case here is all my books on Islam. And it's, different translations of the Quran, hadiths, collections, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, collections of, books on Sufism and Islamic law and things like this, in history. And, truth be told, the first Quran I ever owned was this one. And translated by N.J. Dawood. Plain English translation. No commentary. I remember reading this. This was the first translation of the Quran I ever read, and I remember reading it, and I was engaging with the text. There's no commentary in this translation, and so I was able to sort of formulate ideas about what the text meant to me very early on in my exposure to Islam. And I think that was maybe a very rare experience, because I didn't have people who were already Muslim trying to tell me, this verse means this and this verse means that. I came out of reading it having actually, believe it or not, a very kind of positive attitude to the text. And I think a lot of it was just my own projection onto the text. I think I was able to kind of think to myself, good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell, kind of a very simplistic view of just this one topic. Fighting, for an example, it seemed pretty clear to me that most of the verses in the Quran were talking about fighting in self-defense. There were a couple verses that seemed to be offensive, but I really didn't see that as being a problem. The second one that I got was, I managed to get a copy of The Meaning of the Holy Quran by Abdullah Yusuf Ali. Now, I got this text because I was watching Ahmed Deedat videos and Dr. Zakir Naik videos, and this was the translation of the Quran that Ahmed Deedat was constantly holding up and saying that everybody needed to get a copy of it. So I did, and I started reading it, and when I was reading the commentary, I found that I agreed with a lot of the commentary. The way that Abdul Yusuf Ali talks about the text and the theology, this made a lot of sense to me. At this time, though, I had no idea that this is probably considered to be a very liberal approach to the Quran, and so of course I didn't know that at the time. people didn't really tell me that when I first converted, but I came away from reading his commentary thinking, oh, okay, so in other words, I had a very positive attitude still to Jews and Christians. I took the interpretation of sort of like, Islam's the best vehicle to the next life, but because of the verse in chapter 2 and the verse in chapter 5 that Jews, Christians, and Sabians, if they follow their religion and if they're good people, that they'll have a share in salvation. I took that very seriously. So really, I started forming this idea of that God will punish some people, but you have to be a real wicked person to end up in hell. I mean, this is, God really is giving so many ways for people to be saved that he's not just going to, toss a bunch of people into hell. Now, the next book that I got was this translation, the Noble Quran, by Mushin Khan. And so I read this and was a little struck by the fact that it was more of a literal reading of the Quran, literal translation. The tafsir literature. Oh, this is what actually got me really into looking up tafsir literature, because they reference the tafsirs very much in this. Abdul Yusuf Ali, I think, does it a little bit, but it's mainly his commentary. So I started looking up tafsirs, and I was struck by the fact that some of my personal views on things, reading some other scholars, that I started to get this notion that there was a I guess sort of a liberal and conservative way of approaching the Quran, and it was very much because of reading this translation. Another early text that I got was The Life of Muhammad, Ibn Ishaq's biography. And for those of you who have asked me to do a video on Ibn Ishaq's biography and my current views about it, I'll probably do that in a future video. I'm not going to do that right now because I just looked and we're 21 minutes in, so so much for being brief. I bought this because when I was doing my Robert Spencer critique, he references this book a lot. So I basically bought it because I thought, hey, if I'm going to refute Robert Spencer, I need to be armed with the same text that he has. I'm lazy. I have it over there. I can see it. Very large copy of Muhammad Assad's translation. Muhammad Assad was a huge influence on me. What was interesting, though, is what happened with my experience of being a Muslim was I got to a point where I was comfortable with my own views, and I had sought out schools of thought, and schools of theology, Aqidah, schools of fiqh, and then also studying Sufism, and I sort of was comfortable with my personal views about Islam. I still considered myself a Sunni. I considered myself Orthodox. I became more and more interested in experience, though, and so what I ended up doing is I stopped really worrying about, not really wanting to, argue with other Muslims. In fact, I rarely did that. It was sort of like, I'm following these schools of thought and these opinions. Other people are doing their thing. I became more interested in experience. So I was working on praying 5 times a day, making sure I was fasting during Ramadan, giving zakat, going to the mosque regularly. I mean, I was, following the sunnah as close as I could, of course, from the opinions of the schools that I was following. And so I became more interested in experience as opposed to worrying about theology. And so I put theology on the back burner. Now, granted, I was still making my apologetic videos, and so that was actually a huge way in which I learned about theology, about Islamic theology, and in some ways Christian theology, was engaging in YouTube debates and arguments with people. And so a topic would be brought up, I would just assume that the person who was being polemical was lying or was mistaken about something, and then I would study the topic. And of course I was finding apologetic material, and I was making apologetic arguments, but it was still a good thing. And the silver lining with this is that I was learning about the religion in a deeper and deeper way, because I was acquiring hadith collections, because I thought I need the hadith collections if I'm going to contend with polemicists who are using the hadiths, and I was annoyed with using the internet, and so I wanted to own the collections myself. And so, I was just engaging in a deeper way. And then it was very much, not because I was dissatisfied with the religion, actually, but I started to have things that were eating away at me because I was exposed to other ways of looking at religion. I was starting to study more and more the psychology of religion. And I also began to run into argumentation that I could not just bat away in an apologetic way. And I talk about some of these. So the example of hellfire is one that was sort of a mixed bag of where I was coming from my personal views, and then I suddenly ran into what might be considered the orthodox Sunni perspective on, judgment and punishment and reward and things like this. And found that there was a conflict there. The doctrine of predestination became what the Trinity was for me when I was a Catholic. And so there was a conflict there. It just started to add up more and more and more. And if people are interested in me going through some of these additional things that basically started adding up, and then I found I couldn't consider myself a Muslim anymore, I'll gladly make videos about that. But I would, again, reference my blog for some written material. And so the reason, so really what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that, one, I want to defend people's rights to make their decisions about their spiritual or religious persuasions because of their feelings. People have been abused by organized religion. Let's just be honest. For whatever reason, cultural reasons, their parents, whatever. If religion leaves a bad feeling for people, they're going to leave it. It doesn't really matter whether you think it's rational or not. That's actually completely irrelevant in this conversation. What is relevant is that these people's subjective feelings and experiences are informing them about their religious identity. So really, it doesn't matter whether you want to have an academic conversation with them. That's completely irrelevant. What's relevant is that these people are doing what feels right to them. So I want to make that point. The other point I want to make is not all apostates had, terrible experiences with their parents. Not all apostates have cultural conflicts. Of course, I think that probably came up for me as well a little bit, because being born as a, white male in the United States and coming from a very liberal background, liberal socially and politically, there were certainly conservative concepts that I think sort of could see perhaps, that they were good, but after a while having real issues with them. And so you can't just, unless someone does a self-induced a lobotomy. These are things that you really can't take out of the person. The person has to really go through their life suppressing things that might come up for them that causes conflict. But what I'm really trying to bring up here is that people can go into the faith because they're studying the text, they're having reactions to it, and they're rationally analyzing the material, and they accept it, and then they're faced with counter arguments. They start to consider other options and opinions, and they start doing other critical analysis, and then they come out in a different way. So I just want to impress upon Abu Musa and folks like him who might, be looking for the magical reason why someone leaves Islam. I'm sure every apostate's story is different. I think that everyone's experience with religion is different, and so I don't think it's too simplistic to just boil it down to, they had a crappy childhood, or their parents didn't teach them the religion very well, or et cetera, et cetera. You have to be willing to look at the spectrum of why people change their views on religion. And granted, there are folks out there who I know who still consider themselves Muslims, but they don't really consider themselves very orthodox. And so I wouldn't count them as apostates, but for whatever reason, their opinions changed about their faith. Now, because I have to do this, if you want to learn more about the psychology of religion, 3 texts that I would like to recommend. The first, Carl Jung's 11th volume of his collected works, The Psychology of Religion. Excellent book if you just want to get into a certain theoretical approach to studying the psychology of religion. The other book, The Spiritual Life of Children, by Robert Coles. This book, along with Stages of Faith by James W. Fowler, present religion and spirituality and religion from a very developmental psychological perspective. So you can see how, as we grow up chronologically and biologically, and we start maturing, our mind matures towards religion. For some folks, some people, just like in developmental psychology and Erik Erikson's stages of human development, some people get stuck mentally in certain stages, and they have to wrestle with that. The same thing, according to Fowler, and Coles mentions this as well, that some people get stuck when, somewhere in the development of their understanding of religion and spirituality. So these are whole other variables that I want to introduce into the conversation because, again, I think Essence of Thought did a great job of deconstructing I think I keep referring to him as Musa Adnan's video. But, I think he did, again, great job. But I want to introduce something that I can offer to the conversation, which is talking about a psychological lens to view people's interaction with spirituality and religion, which I don't really see a lot of people. I mean, I guess I do hear people talking about this, but again, it's usually very polemical or very apologetic. And what can I say? I'm not interested in either of those anymore. I'm just interested in understanding people's experiences and not really judging people for them, but certainly trying to understand what makes people tick when it comes to religion and spirituality from a psychological point of view. So I hope this wasn't too scattered. Hope I can offer some insight into my own experiences and my reaction to Essence of Thought's critique of Musa Adnan's video. Again, if you have any questions or if you want to know my thoughts about something really specific, I could be persuaded to make a video about a particular concept that Islam discusses and sort of, what are my thoughts about it. People were interested in me making a video about what are my thoughts about Ibn Ishaq's biography, because I've alluded to it in past videos. So that video hopefully will be brief because it'll just be me referencing the introduction. Shock. I know, shocking, gasps. And just really kind of, seeing where I stand with Ibn Ishaq's work, as opposed to being a Muslim apologist in the past and utterly dismissing it, as what usually happens with the Sirah literature when Muslim apologists handle it. Okay, well, I think that's all I have to say for now. Hope this video is interesting to some folks. Thank you all for watching, and for those of you who made it to the end of the 32-minute, 47-second mark, thank you. Love is the law, love under will. Peace be with you all.